mani be me hum, mani be me hum, mani be me hum, mani be me hum.
Compassion, awareness, and wisdom. Trauma and negative conditioning can start in the womb in early childhood. Self-defeating attitudes and self-destructive patterns of behavior that are persistently disruptive often have their start in the womb. If negative prenatal conditioning occurs, it can be aggravated by the physical trauma of birth. These early traumas are then likely to be reinforced by any subsequent life traumas and negative conditioning. It was impossible for us to stop or control the situations that traumatized us when we were babies and children. But understanding the early origins of trauma can help us here and now take better control of our healing and more effectively steer our personal liberation from the obstacles and problems caused by that trauma. The entire universe is karma-ing. We have to understand that we are actually produced from immense interactions through beginningless time that have created enough power in this individual karma-ing to produce a human form. So when you die and you actually are going through the bardo to search out a new rebirth or incarnation, during that period, all the previous interactions of that being through beginningless time are all a potential. And depending on the being's previous actions, it will guide them to a particular incarnation. And we should think of this as like when you die, your energy field kind of expands. We think of it as when you're dying, it shrinks, and then when it goes into the bardo, it expands to a huge amount of potentials from all your past actions. You could have been an animal, or a hell realm, or heavenly realm, other human realms. And when you start to look at it in terms of of all the possible potentials that you have in your karmic flow, you begin to understand why this is such a precious opportunity. And I'm presenting it this way because of the idea of an ego, and that how we are basically more involved in paying rent and saturating the senses than we are in any deep exploration of our entire being. All your basic emotions are formed in the womb. And that means they're actually before there was a you. In our tradition, we don't consider you have an ego or you aren't a person yet until you've come out of the womb and the umbilical cord has been cut. And that's the first time you actually are a separate ego entity. Prior to that, you are your mother. And you are this past potential of karma that has chosen that particular time, that particular set of circumstances from your entire karmic past has kind of coalesced. It's been calculated from your past actions, and when you hit the womb, that pretty much sets the history for this life. It brings all those karmic formations into the correct karmic inheritance for your exploration of the universe. So now that you are in the womb, the idea is that is the womb. It's your forming. You're not completely formed yet. And we talked about this energy body. The being at that point, when they first incarnate, are really not formed at all. It's just an energy field. And it is actually total love at that point. And it is what we would try to do when we were practicing Kundalini yoga, getting back to that energy field, the original energy field, a healthy energy field, clean energy field. So in this journey that we are on, this exploration that we're involved in, the forming in the womb is primary for our core emotions. And I think what's really important about this is that you are not taking part in any of this forming. Even your past actions are just forming you. You have no choice in it. And in the womb, you actually have no choice either. And in this case, you're receiving your mother's and father's karmic mind states, emotions, chemistry are being imprinted on your body. And they are you. They're completely invisible to you. They're camouflaged, they're built-in part of your flow of your psyche so that you don't realize that these are something that you've been put on you. You think that in some way they're you, but they're not, in a sense, anything that you chose to be. They're states and conditions that have been placed on you, well, from the past and from this lifetime, but primarily from the conditioning in the womb. So there are 4 stages in the womb that we should become aware of, because they're very, very, very critical if you want to understand anything that's happening in your life, anything that's happening in your dreams, and everything that's happening in your meditation. They determine how you move through life. The first stage is the forming of the body, and that's what we call the bliss stage. Then there's second stage, which is interruption of the bliss. Third stage, which is violent. And fourth stage is the cut coming out of the womb, the cut. The first stage actually is 9 months. The second stage is, we'll say 24 hours. And the third stage is actually only a very short time. In the third stage, you're coming out of the womb. You're coming into the world. And then there's the cutting of the umbilical cord. And that's when the consciousness forms an ego. There's a split that happens. And this is the first time that you're starting to build up experiences as an individual. So when we talk about the first stage, we are talking about a very, very blissful experience. And you think about this, it has to be that way. Otherwise, the tender forming could not stay in the womb. And the experience of it is how it is experienced by that non-ego being. It's just an expanding energy field of infinite bliss. There's no fluctuation. It's just a constant feeling of expansion. Incredible feeling of growth and expansion of metta, of love and energy. Visually, it is just a rainbow light. You are a rainbow light of infinite expanding blissful energy. Now there are interruptions that do occur in that phase of development, of course, and if there is actually, say, a car accident, it could be quite a severe trauma occur to the fetus in that stage of development. Also, if your mother smokes a cigarette, say the husband left, or they had a fight, or there's problems about money, there could be at that time some impressions of unpleasantness arise, but pretty much it is a pretty even floating blissful experience, and that is why we take drugs. I'll tell you, that is why. That is why people crave to be calm, and that is why people generally do meditation. They want calm. It's really quite amazing to recontact that womb experience like that and understand how powerful a experience that is in the core of your being, to get back to that state of no worry, no anxiety, no hunger, constantly expanding energy, free energy as much as you ever want, continually opening the heart, opening and opening and opening. And then what happens next in the womb and also in your practice, we'll relate it to the womb and the practice and dreams. So the next thing that happens in the womb is that you actually are going to that last 24-hour period before you come out, and there are beginning to be some very strange things happening. Very ominous things, but you can't put your finger, you don't as a fetus, you don't know what is happening. It's just not right. There's a chemical change in the mother that's happening. There's the beginning of pressures and contractions, and the mother is also going through a kind of a upheaval in the psyche. And how that manifests in a dream is that basically you would be running and hiding in something, and there would be evil things trying to break in to your house. And if it's in your bedroom, the walls are going to be vibrating with forces, and you're going to be vibrating inside. There's fears. It's ominous. You can't put your finger on exactly what it is. It's like coming from everywhere, a fear from everywhere, and then it might just go away because this is not too severe at that stage. It's gray. In meditation, when you're practicing meditation, the experiences that you will have in meditation, anyone that's done any Vipassana, anyone that's done any meditation is going to understand what I'm saying now. You'll be sitting and you'll get deathly tired, and you'll sink down into this absolutely murky, gray, sickening type of thing, and you just cannot lift the consciousness up. You just cannot lift it up. It's one of the worst feelings that you can have in meditation. You feel as you're absolute failure. There's no way that you can ever make any progress. That is the type of feeling that you are conditioned into in the second stage in the womb. The third stage in the womb is when you're actually getting really severe contractions, and you are beginning to be trying to be pushed out of the womb. It's instead of gray and dull and murky, it's high-end illumination, knives, poking, sharp, violent, incredible fear, incredible high energy. It's crisis mode. It's death mode. It's the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. The feeling in that stage, in meditation, what you will experience in meditation, it's very close to the hypnagogic state prior to going into a dream. You want to get out. There's a feeling of having to get out, yet there's an absolutely phenomenal frustration of not being able to have control over your body. There's no strength there. So it's just this inner frustration that you want to be out, but you have no strength to do it, but you have to get out. So you carry on. It also could be experienced in meditation. One of the primary, anybody who's done any meditation could know what I talk about. There's a band around your head here, like a band, like a metal band around your head. It's compressed like that. That's the beginning of the head coming out the womb. It's very violent. You can't hardly fit through, and yet you make it. We call it the iron wall experience in meditation, where you are actually pushing your head against an iron wall, and of course it's impossible, and all of a sudden you move through. And then the last stage is when you come out, is when they cut the umbilical cord. And that experience in meditation, if you have it in meditation, now you may not have had this one, but some of you may have, and you'll be sitting very peaceful in your embryonic first stage bliss, hoping it will not go away. And it will feel like somebody just came up behind you with an ice pick and rammed it right through the back of your back, through your spine and into your heart. It'll take your breath away. That's deep in your cellular structure of cutting the umbilical cord. Piti is physical experiences, and nimitta will be visionary experiences. The quality of those experiences that you have in meditation, the kind of experiences that present themselves to your consciousness as you are developing tranquility work, will be directly from those touching on which stage in the womb you are touching on at that time. So if you are having brilliant light experiences, that would be associated with third stage. If you have an experience where you're sitting in meditation, all of a sudden you start to see like bands of light, or then you kind of go into a visionary experience, and you're moving through crystals, which is very common, and then it will start to move through rings, a tunnel, going through a tunnel, light at the end of the tunnel, and you'll be like you're floating out through a hole at the end of this tunnel. That's the birth. That's the fourth stage, birth canal experience in meditation. So we get many different types of experiences which are well recorded in the Theravada literature, also in the other traditions, but very well ordered in the Theravada tradition because it's so old, that the teachers there don't know where they've come from. They just ignore them and go on. They're just distractions. Which brings us to a very, very interesting point about mental cultivation and traditions, and which traditions are right and which traditions are the fastest and which traditions are what. That most of the teachers actually have a very narrow range of opening, of awakening, a very narrow range of awakening. And that these experiences that we're having, if we want to be fully liberated, I don't see how you can do that without reliving our core forming in the womb. I don't see how that can be possible without the core formings in the womb. Emotionally, I can't see myself how that would be possible. So we have teachers teaching Vipassana meditation, and the Vipassana insights that they talk about, which are there are 8 Vipassana insights. The first stage of Vipassana insight, now there are 16 insights in insight meditation. 8 of them are considered strong enough to create a deep change in your being that prepare you for awakening. And you have to understand now that when we talk about awakening, we're not talking about a little experience where you feel well. This is a major shock to the psyche to find out that you are not that important in all this happening. That there's this entire universe that's created you and you're connected to everything else. And you have no idea where you came from and you have no idea where you're going. So you understand, you have to be well cushioned. And you do have to have some shock experiences just to get to the really well acceptance and cushioning. So the Vipassana experiences very, very, very much parallel the experiences that were conditioned on you in the womb. And the first major experience in the Vipassana, there are 3 insights, but they're not life-changing. That is the insight of the difference between mind and matter, the insight between cause and effect, and the insight into impermanence, suffering, and no self, which means no fixed, unchanging identity, which you are here now, but who were you before, and before, and before, and before. The first Vipassana experience, we generally now, the Westerners, have coined it AMP, arising and passing away. And during that is definitely, most definitely, the experience of actually really contacting first stage in the womb. It is luminous, it is perfect, it is blissful. You have all kinds of psychic powers come online, just as you may have in the womb. After that experience, the next Vipassana experience is called Jnana. And in that one, you're now in heaven. You have just been in heaven with the A and P. You are enlightened. For all intents and purposes, you are enlightened in that stage. But you're not enlightened. But you've got all the basic powers come online for the first time. It will be the biggest and most memorable experience you will ever have on your path to awakening. It's a major transition point in a human being to go to the AMP. Although it is not enlightenment, it is not transcendent. So the second Vipassana insight, and the next 3 or 4 in a row, second stage in the womb, you're crashed to earth. And there is this low-grade terror that happens. You're lost. There's fears cruising through your being. You lost the energy. You're totally scattered out. You have no control. You can hardly know which way is right or left. You can't concentrate for more than a half a second. You're all over the map. Sometimes you'll be trying to concentrate on the rising and falling of the abdomen, and it'll feel like it's happening over here to the side, way out to the side, or the front. There's all these strange distortions and things. As you move into the other Vipassana, you start losing control of the bowels. You puke. You have diarrhea. You lose parts of the body. You are the whole skin is burning. It is basically the Vipassana experiences very, very closely parallel the experiences that you are getting in the womb. And even during this A&P, it's not uncommon that people actually remember a past life or remember the womb, although it's very rare and it's never really talked about. So that's very nice, but how do you get there? I mean, how do you actually contact the womb? I mean, it's a very a difficult area to directly relive the womb. It's difficult to relive the womb. That requires psychic powers. Quite strong psychic powers. You're going to have to go back in time to do that, or space, depending on which way you enter it. The whole of awakening is basically transcending time and space in the idea of a local personal consciousness and the idea that you are in control and that you've spread out more in the universe and you're evolving into a completely different being. You do have to give up the idea that you are going to survive this journey to awakening. And there will be something emerging out of it, but you will be much less important as you become more awakened. Now, for me, and the way that I have been working with this, I've developed very high levels of concentration, and I've been extensively trained in working with psychic powers. And I really don't think that anyone here is likely to take the path that I took to get back into the womb. So we will leave it at that there are actually these 4 stages, that they are in your core of your being, your core emotions. We will also suggest that the Vipassana experiences are actually you beginning to relive in a more conscious way, in a very conscious way, those core emotions that were formed in the womb. But I think now the easiest way that we can work with these and see these core emotions so that we can actually do something about our trauma and our negative conditioning, I think, and for me, the most valuable teachings that have unfolded in me, I've got no instruction for it, it's just unfolded in me. The pieces were all given to me, and I did the work, but I didn't expect the conjunction of the various teachings to come and bring me to this new type of teaching which I'm working with. I've done the Kundalini yoga, so that's part of the 6 yogas of Naropa, where that's dream yoga. I've worked with LaBerge and not him personally, but through his literature and the lucid dreaming. So I've been extensively working with dreaming for quite a long time now, and it's been really, if you have any practice to do in the city, do dream yoga, because you do it when you're sleeping, a whole other side of your being. So what happens in the dream? 80% of all children's dreams are chase scenes. Usually there's something dark chasing them that isn't clearly defined. Usually it's murky. There isn't very much vision into the distance. Now, that type of dream is generally associated with second stage in the womb. There are the type of dreams where you have to crawl up mountains, struggle to crawl up with roots and crawling and working and working and working and working and working and working. And then when you get up to the top, you usually tumble over the top and splash down into water or something like that. That's very obviously the last stages of coming out of the womb. So the way that you can work is it would be important to do your study in how to increase the frequency and clarity of your dreams. It requires very little effort. There is a really good book called Lucid Dreaming, which I highly recommend that you read, that gives very detailed instructions on how to cultivate yourself to remember your dreams. So we're getting back to these type of experiences that you get in meditation, and we're saying that it actually, I feel that most of it, not all, we'll say most of it is actually reliving those core, in Vipassana, the core experiences that were formed on you in the womb. But prior to that, we had a lot of experiences of lights and visions and tunnels and crystals and blisses in the body, bubblings in the body, all kinds of different experiences. And in the Theravada tradition, if you're into Vipassana, they say just ignore them. They're traps. Forget about that. I am not of that school. I would say that if you got... people say, well, there's vanity involved and you want to go back there and, you want to keep clinging to those beautiful experiences. And so you should be smart enough to know that the way that the consciousness is built is it wants to go back to anything that's good. But in this evolving that we do on the spiritual path, it is basically just substituting a lesser useful state for a more useful state, and then that one you find a more useful state, and you're kind of growing as you're moving through different levels of purification in your being. So if you can actually have while you're doing your Vipassana, you're not supposed to, say you had a memory, a feeling come up in your being, of just a total drop in energy, complete drop in energy, where you were feeling really good and all of a sudden you just feel horrible. There's just feeling of, it's just hopeless. And they're saying, well, just forget that, name it, and go on. I would say at that point, if you really want your practice to progress and it to be interesting, you should say, what was that? And I'm also going to suggest that you say, that wasn't me, that was Mom. That was my mom. My mom just heard that my aunt died. And there was this shock wave that went through the body and that directly imprinted on the fetus. Now, you understand what we're going on here. You got 9 months where every few minutes there's a different chemical wash happening from your mother or your mother's mother or your mother's mother's mother. So how long has this been passed down? How long are these core emotions passed down into families? What is this lineage? How can you actually break that lineage? And the thing is that in Vipassana or any meditation, when we do have experiences like that, we have to connect we should kind of get, well, yeah, I remember that happening in my practice many times. It has happened over and over again. And I remember that possibly happening in my early childhood. I remember that happening. So then you kind of get to the point you say, well, I don't remember anything that caused that. I can't put my finger on any event that's actually caused that type of drop of energy like that. Or it could be a shock wave that goes through the body. So then you have to question again, like we're introducing the idea that I feel that everyone, when they're sitting, should think of almost everything that's happening actually happened to them in the womb. And try and make that connection. Like the idea that this mind state that is present, especially if it's a surprise, a shock that goes through the body, happen in daily life, happen in practice. You need to kind of get back to that quality, and you need to get back into the womb and kind of feel what was happening, like understand, like with this conscious mind now that we have, we have kind of a over-awareness of what's happening in the womb, and we can start to see that these feelings, there's a whole bunch of feelings that are us, that actually are us, but our mom put them on us. And that's basically the type of clearing that we need to undertake for the spiritual path. You get a Vipassana experience, but if you don't understand, if you don't make the connections of what caused that mind state, that imprint, if you don't understand what the forming is of you, if you don't see the event, the feeling, and understand how it was put together, you're still not liberated. It'll still keep coming back. You've got to really make all the connections. You have to have kind of a visual or smell kind of feeling, and make the connections of how that was put on to get some liberation from those conditions. Is this making any sense? Everybody can understand what I'm talking about if they've done any practice. All us drug addicts, we know what we're talking about. Let's just say nothing for sex. The perfect partner that's going to solve it all. Euphoria. That's it. That feeling, and that love feeling, that relationship, it's everything. Wow, it's amazing. They understand everything I'm saying. I just talk for hours. First stage. Okay? First stage in the womb. It's pulling us back. So if we don't actually, and just another thing is that in the Tantric tradition, we've talked about the Vajrayana or the Theravada tradition, early Buddhism, and their Vipassana jnanas. Those are the knowledges. And they're working strictly with meditation and what happens, and they're moving through these Vipassana experiences, and it is doing clearing in the being. It definitely is doing clearing in the being. But I'm suggesting that there's actually more to it than just that. I think you really gotta clear the. We'll assume that some beings do clear the womb that way. But there is actually, in the Vajrayana teaching, you understand that the Tantric teaching is actually directly working with the clearing of the womb as the primary source that needs to be cleared, because in the Vajrayana teaching, they're talking about teachings of the Kundalini Yoga, which is first experienced as the being enters the womb. That's the first experience. Infinite bliss energy that is central to the creation of matter in the universe. And they know that it's primarily forming in the womb, but as you move through the stages of development and you get into third, fourth stages, that it is those later stages in the womb have a tendency to crystallize past negative karmic formations on the body. And the energy field gets shrouded, killed in a sense, with girdles. It looks like crustaceans on the body, on the energy field. And the light disappears. So in the Vajrayana, when we talk about doing Kundalini Yoga, is that we use a mat which is the central canal with the chakras, with the nadis. We learn how to gather energy in the body and move it through various chakras to open it up. What they're doing there is they're consciously trying to recreate. They're not actually. They're doing the best they can to give you a very static and sensible type of practice that will open up the spontaneous experience that happens in the energy body, that happens in the womb, or is happening in the background behind this one, except it's all beaten up and crimped up through negative karmic formations. So with Kundalini Yoga, they're trying to open up that energy field to give you the type of clarity and psychic power that you will need to do deeper work. So the Tantric teaching is not on about just awakening. Tantric teaching is on about the creation and dissolution of matter. The creation and dissolution of matter. So the idea of the womb is the creation of the matter. So it's very much focused on what to do to clear that being of any negative karmic formations that are forming in it. And what they're saying is that when you clear the womb, you clear a lot of these life traumas and negative conditionings are automatically cleared when you clear the womb. So you have conditionings in a womb, you have susceptibilities. And then in life, events occur that crystallize or enforce those susceptibilities, or things in life happen where they just sort of dissipate. There is one practice that is done to get back into the womb experience. It's something that you should understand that it's a very powerful meditation, that if you're not really stable and clear, you probably should decide not to do it. It's usually the people that are not stable and clear that decide to do it. But I'm just letting you know there is one practice, that the only one I know that actually works really well for this recall of the womb experience. It's called Sama Arahang. And it's practiced in one monastery in Thailand called Wat Pak Nam. Namjo Rinpoche taught this to me. I asked him to teach it to me. And you start by concentrating a bubble, a bindu. You know what a bindu is? A bindu, a sphere, a crystal sphere, at your right nostril. When you get that formed, you can do Anapanasati to get it started with, but once you get that visualization pretty clear, you move it to the right eye, just inside on the right eye, on the inside. Then you move it to the center of the head, in the center of the head, so that's 3. Then you move it to the throat. Then you move it to the heart center. Then you move it to the belly button on the inside of the body, center part of the body. And then you move it 2 fingers up from the belly button, the sphere. When you're doing this descent from the nose, you would say Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang. And you use that sort of slow mantra to keep you on track until you get your visualization. And when you move it to the inside of the eye, you do the same thing, Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang, until you've stabilized it there. And then you move it in the center of the head, stabilize it, Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang. Throat center, down the center of the body, heart center, belly button, and then up 2 finger widths high above the belly button. And then you concentrate on that sphere and you say, Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang. And then you go into the center of that sphere, and what you will see is a picture. You'll see an object of some kind. It may be quite ordinary to start with, like a fork. And then it will transform into a different object, we'll say a teacup. And then it will transform into a plate. And then it will transform into, say, a tablecloth. When you get 4 images, you just sort of stop and review and say, yes, kitchen table, I'm going to eat. And then you focus back on the sphere again. And as you are getting more concentrated and refined, the images will become more refined. And you go through 4 images and you put them together into a story. Then you go into 4 more images and put them into the story. Then 4 more images and put them into the story. And they'll start going faster and faster, and a very powerful question will come up. Like, in my case, it was, what form does consciousness take after I die? So in combination with images are coming, a question is formed. Without the question, you're never going to have very much progress in meditation, because it's the question which gives you the interest and the energy and gives you the answer. You can do all the exercises in the world, but you'll just be bored to death. You have to have a question. What happens is that it's a brilliant light image, brilliant light image, brilliant light image, brilliant light, put it all together. Brilliant light image, brilliant light image, brilliant light image. And a question starts to form. You get deeper and deeper in concentration. Your body will get so thick you can hardly move. I actually, when I was doing this, I couldn't stay awake walking. I had so much concentration. I had to jog for hours with that vision, and I would sit down for 15 minutes. Jog for hours holding that. And it got to the point after a few days where the light was just brilliant coming over me like that. And then it went above my head, and it started to hit my skull with rainbow ribbons coming down. It reverses, come down, and I went, boom, just disappeared right back into a previous life like that. Came through the bardo, all the stages in the bardo, and then incarnated into the womb, and watched the body form around this Kundalini energy field with all the nadis. Watched the body grow and form around it, and then watched and felt all the conditioning come onto my being. Oh, it's so bad when that pure energy thing disappears. You want everything to go back there, but it starts to disintegrate. Formations start to come on, energy formations, and you can feel it as, in that sense, is a greed-based thing, and it just, the whole the whole energy field just shuts off. As soon as one of those patternings come on from the past coming forward, then you got moms coming on, got past formations coming up and crystallizing on the body, got moms formations coming on, crystallizing on the body. But you see it happening, and you go through the birth process, and with that type of experience, you actually go through the whole life also. This life, you go through the whole life, this life. Recall it pretty much day by day. But it isn't linear. It's like a fishbowl. It's everything all at once. And those experiences that you've contacted in the womb now, what happens, that shock, you ever get a shock sometimes? Oh God, I forgot I left the stove on, right? My wallet, my cell phone. There's a shock, that's definitely womb. And you see, then the real life experiences are actually enforcing that experience that's in the womb. You don't need that shock. It's like that with all those core emotions. There's so much a part of you that you couldn't think it could be any other way. If you have a reliving of the womb experience, with those strong formations being identified, and then you have a continuation of it through your life up to the present, and you can examine, you're in a very, very different, you're in a transcendent consciousness. It is not the same as ordinary consciousness. You have tremendous flexibility and power during those type of experiences. So you will start to make connections of all the events in your life where you had that same feeling that was conditioned onto you in the womb. It'll be just like pulling up a string with all these events in it, like that. And then you hit another one. It'll be hundreds of different reinforcing events. Thousands of times you had those same emotions in your life. Just by seeing that, they don't go away. But the ignorance of them does. You're getting a much clearer picture of where these are coming from. And it's a tremendous relief. It gives you a tremendous amount of exhilaration to realize that, in fact, there is a way out. There is something beyond that. There is an awakened state beyond that conditioning. And that you need to continue. You have the energy to continue on with this exploration if you go to the womb. Now, you aren't going to clear the womb the first time through. You generally won't make all the connections the first time through. You might make a great deal of them, but in your life, if you continue to work, you won't have any choice. It isn't something, I think I'll do that work now, or I don't think I'll do that work anymore. You have to do that work. When you wake up in the morning and you review your dreams, you're going to have those feelings are going to be there. You're going to recognize where they come from. You're going to start making the connections. So you're going to have a scene in your dream. You're going to have the emotion. And then what happens is the final step in this clearing is you start to make the connection where it came from, at what stage in the womb. And that is a kind of, it's like an intuitive thing. It just goes, oh, right. And that just starts to evaporate like that. Comes back, evaporates. Each time there's a bit more clearing. Each time you see it a little bit more fine. This time it isn't such a shock. It's less and less of a shock. More and more understanding, more and more liberation happens. The feeling of the third stage in the womb, if you want to get a feeling and you want to contact third stage of the womb, if you want to contact first stage of the womb, you lie in a non-chlorinated hot pool. Close your eyes and just float. It shouldn't be chlorinated. I know I floated in one of those deprivation tanks, but it had a bad smell. It should be really clean. If you want to get to the third stage, just stick a rock out in front of you in the yard or in your room. Nice big rock. And try and move that with your mind. I'm quite serious. That will get you very, very much. That is the feeling of you trying to push through out of the womb. Sheer frustration. And it did get me in contact with that, and then the lights, and then back through the bardo, through dying, through the death process in the previous being, through the bardo. People say there isn't a bardo. There is a bardo. Definitely is a bardo. Definitely is. And it's longer or shorter depending on your spiritual evolution. It can be quite long if you're very awakened, and if you're really, really highly developed being, anagami, and you've taken the bodhisattva vow to incarnate again for compassionate purposes, you could possibly keep your consciousness all the way through the bardo and into the womb. And that's what a tulku is. As for a child that has a cesarean, it's also necessary for life to have that full cycle, even though it's quite struggling. Life is a struggle, and if you don't have that map in your psyche of that struggle and that coming out, it generally will create a person who doesn't struggle. It doesn't have a lot of drive. That would be Namgyal Rinpoche's explanation of that type of person. You do have to go through even though the cycles in the womb are at least the later stages, those last few hours are very unpleasant. It's actually having remembered it and having gone through meditation and having the same pattern occur, I don't think I would have continued on with my meditation hadn't I had that struggle like that. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I had my father who reinforced the struggle in me, So, he toughened me up. He was a Marine. He toughened me up. All right? All kinds of incredible, dangerous things we would do together, like climbing towers and, being beat up all the time, and endurance feats. And like when I learned to drive, how do you usually learn to drive? Here's my dad. Has to be back on base. He's a fighter pilot, a major in the Marine Corps. I'm 12 years old, right? He's taken me back to the base, but he's been drinking, and he can't stay awake. Now, it's just a mere 200-mile drive to the base. I've never driven a vehicle in my life, of course. I'm 12 years old. It's a stick shift. He just puts me behind the wheel and says, just drive to Detroit. Just follow this road. And then he goes to sleep. I'm terrified, right? I'm living in utter terror. And I don't know what Detroit is, really. So I'm ending up, here I am later, driving down the expressway. Actually, it wasn't that. The speed limit in Michigan at that time was 100 miles an hour. So I was driving at 100 miles an hour, and now all of a sudden I'm in downtown Detroit in heavy traffic. 12 years old, can hardly see over there. And I'm terrified, and I'm not sure whether I should wake the giant up or not. I don't know if I'm here or not yet. So you understand, this reinforces something that's happened to me in the womb. Well, it probably would have, because of the relationship in the father and the mother together. It's not just the mother. The father is with the mother. There's a dialogue between the father and the mother. These experiences that I'm getting in the womb are partially from my father and the interaction in my mother, my father. Now I'm coming out, and it's being reinforced because it's the same situation. He was treating me the same way he taught my mother the same kind of attitude. Like when I was 14, which was also really terrifying, somebody was breaking into it. We had a construction company, and we had a gas pump in the back there that we gassed up our fleet of ready-mix trucks. As we had. Somebody was stealing the gas. Right. My father was a real, Marine kind of guy. He didn't actually, I don't think he understood that the kids had a different kind of developmental process than Marines in battle. So He takes me up onto the roof of the building overlooking the yard, and he has a sleeping bag. I'm 14 years old. A sleeping bag, a thermos of hot soup, and a fully loaded .30-06, which I have never shot before. And he tells me to shoot out the tires of the vehicle if it comes into the yard to steal gas. Well, first of all, I was thinking, shoot a gun at a gas pump? I don't know. And I was, again, similar to the driving, similar to the other, like climbing these high water towers as a child, terrified. Like I was constantly put in these situations where it was a matter of life and death and terror, living in utter terror, that I had to shoot. I was praying all night long not that these people wouldn't come, because I would have to shoot them, So that's like an example of how these conditions in the womb, which would have been present in the wombs in some extent because of the mother and the father, and then later in life these being reinforced, aside from the fact he used to beat me up every day, aside from that, right? So what does that produce? It produces a person who is under terror, living in terror all the time. So what happens, what is the repercussions of that? Well, I developed some very serious learning abilities because I was in terror all the time. Couldn't stay awake, So I was put in school for the mentally retarded. And I never did actually learn to read until 1990. It was the first words I ever read. I taught myself the alphabet and started reading in 1990. Tremendous retardation from terror and fear, totally paralyzing the being. I mean, I loved to sit on a dock and watch insects, and I was very good in nature. I spent my time out. I was totally into athletics, which I was very good at, and I did the 3 years of Olympic weightlifting. So, I had my outlets. But as far as the ability to learn, I was totally paralyzed because I was still living in terror. But the physical stuff was a way out for me. And then I went to the East and became a monk. All that training, all that discipline, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and going off to the construction yard. I mean, my big birthday present when I was 16 is I went on the highway driving double-track semi-tractor trailers, two of them back, 16 years old, driving those things, those heavy trucks like that. That was also terrifying, by the way. I would drive all day, hoping nobody would pull out in front of me, because there's no way you can stop these things. And then I would dream all night of driving down the highway, looking for dangers. So that was very, again, all you understand the womb and later life events, because you're working with the same unit. You're working where whatever conditioned you in the womb, the mother and the father, are going to be reinforced later on in life. You're going to be repeating those type of mind states are going to be recreated and really setting it. Or in my case, I would find Tanjakun Rajasiddhamuni in downtown Bangkok, who would take me in as his student in meditation. A very rare event for Tanjakun Rajasiddhamuni, the head meditation master of Thailand. And he put me in the room next to him. He got me medical care. He got me really good food. He bought me really good clothes. And all I had to do was practice for 20 hours every day and never read a book, which I didn't tell him it was no problem. He asked me if I'd ever read anything about Buddhism. I said, no. He said, oh, that's good. Don't read it. That's good. At least that pressure will be released from you. Won't have to do it. That then your parents, this is quite important. You got the womb conditioning, which was put onto you prior to you having any defenses whatsoever. It's just an imprint of this. It's not images. It's just an imprint on the emotional body, just a direct imprint. Come out, and then your parents are basically reinforcing some of those imprints. Now, my mother was quite decent. I mean, she was really, really good, as mothers usually are. Not always, but she was really good. But my father was still the same. He was still really out to lunch. He was just terrible, terribly ignorant person. He wasn't really interested in the home thing at all. It was just an irritant. So I would be beat up and kicked around anytime I wanted to play. He'd just get angry and violent and whack you around and that sort of thing. It was just irritating. I was just an interference in his space, right? It doesn't produce the best kind of well-rounded being. But I did have enough obvious in this case, good karmic merit to bring me right straight through that. I mean, Amjel said I had the best parami of any of his students. And he wondered why I took so long to make progress. He couldn't understand it. He says, you got all the goods. You could just be awakened at any time, and yet you're doing more and more practice, more years and years of practice. And it was because of that conditioning. It was because of that conditioning. Severely damaged emotionally. Yet I had that power. I had that ability to stick things. It was incredibly painful to practice for me. I mean, it was not easy. But I did have the drive. So there is a possibility of growth and transformation. Let's forget about enlightenment. Let's just say there's a possibility of the going down of suffering, a real decent going down of suffering, to make sense of what's happening, to have happiness and clarity, and not have all this heavy failure, no good, low energy, can't do it, never have anything, money. People bring in strength with them that can manifest in your life. It's not just your conditioning in the womb. It's also whatever has brought you into the womb, this past power, those past lives, that actually can carry you through and give you the ability to work with those experiences. Right. And when we talk about parami, I'm going to just talk about, this is a really good point here. When we talk about past life versus mom conditioning, we're talking about what they call parami. And the illustration that would be given in the scriptures is like people say, well, what is parami? And the Buddha would say it's strength. And they say, well, what does that mean? And he gives two examples. He says, if there's a raft out there that's taking passengers back and forth across the river, which they used to have a string, and pull it across. You can put in cattle, people, rocks, lots of rocks and everything, and it's still stable. There's no problem with that. Or you can put a leaf in the river and put a little stone on it and it sinks. And what they're saying with parami, it is that support, that incredible support you would get that brings you through all kinds of difficult situations. So a very wealthy businessman, in a sense, he commits a crime by stealing $100 million from the bank, and what does he get? He gets a bonus. In a sense, it's like parami. Well, then you got some kid who steals, a couple of cans of Coke, and he gets put in jail. And that is also kind of another idea about a parami and strengths, that we all come in, nobody's equal. And some people with the conditioning in the womb and their later life experiences, it isn't just the parents that are actually reinforcing or neutralizing those experiences in the room. It's your school teachers, right? Your community, what happens on the playground. All those things can either accentuate those early core things or neutralize them. Right. So we have the parami, that basic strength that you come in with, that can carry a person through very difficult times. Compassion, awareness, and wisdom.
Om mani padme hum, Om mani padme hum, Om mani padme hum, Om mani padme